Uh, Friends, welcome. Can you hear me out there? Oh, good. Okay. Welcome. I'm Hitesh Hathi. I'm with the Mittal Institute. And on behalf of all of us at the Mittal Institute, it's really a great pleasure to welcome you all here for the first Harish C. Mahindra lecture since COVID. So please welcome. And you know we're celebrating an extraordinary person here. So let me just, before I do anything, say, how many of you have a Madhur Jaffrey cookbook, have cooked from a Madhur Jaffrey recipe, learned how to cook from Madhur Jaffrey? That includes Abhijit. So really, that's a way of saying it's really just a distinct honor to have Madhur Jaffrey here with us to help us restart this distinguished lecture series, and we'll hear more about the series in a second, along with an old friend and a gentleman distinguished in his own right, Abhijit Banerjee. Abhijit, thank you for joining us. And, you know, before we get to their introductions, I just want to reflect for a moment, because it really is a very fitting and extraordinary moment. We in the Mittal Institute, we began this year, the academic year, with a historic conversation between two giants of modern South Asia, Syed Babar Ali Saab and Professor Amartya Sen. With Leela Gandhi, they were talking about their experience of the last 75 years of independence. We followed that with a concert by one of the most creative young artists in the region, Pakistani singer and musician Ali Sethi. Ali, before a crowd of 1,200, he sang of what he called the unpartitioned heart. And so maybe I want to say, as we are nearing the end of the academic year, this is not really the end, it's a completion of this journey with two extraordinary and distinguished people here for the Mahindra Lecture. And before we go on, let me ask my colleague Tarun. Tarun is the faculty director of the Mittal Institute. He's a professor at the Harvard Business School. If you ever wonder why the Mittal Institute does so much and just about everything, including things that don't normally fit in the range of academia, it's because Tarun is interested in almost everything in a very deep way. Actually, why am I saying almost? In everything. And it's both difficult and wonderful. He has guided this institution for about 10 years. Along with his deep academic work, he's also maintained the richest connections with civil society, with the creative community, with entrepreneurs. So, Tarun Khanna, please tell us about the Mahindra Lecture.
Thank you, Hitesh, and thank you to our two guests and eminences for being here with us today, and thanks to all of you for coming. Before we do anything else, could we just have a little bit of a round of applause for the team, the Mittal Institute team that has just been... It's always amazing to me that we end up doing so much at this institute, but vanishingly small amount is done by me. We just have an extraordinary team, so thank you for that, and thank you, Hitesh. My task is very simple. It'll probably take a minute and a half, and it's to acknowledge the extraordinary generosity of the Mahindra family generally, and in particular, the generosity that they expressed through endowing the Harish C. Mahindra Lecture Series. I'd like to say a few words about it. It was inspired by Harish Mahindra's passion for education, which I most think of as manifest in not just his commitment to education of men and women of all ages, but also for creating the United World College, which I know many people in the room have had some exposure to, which is located in Pune in India. He's also, of course, an extraordinary industrialist, founding chairman of a steel company that's part of the Mahindra Group, and a director of Mahindra & Mahindra. The lecture series is meant to, in a very encompassing sense, invite eminences who have really shaped the fabric of society in India, considered very broadly. And just to give you a sense, we've probably had, I've been at the helm of this institute as the founding director since 2012, I forget, more than 10 years, 12 years, 13 years. And we've had about 8 or 9 Mahindra speakers. It's supposed to be an annual series, but we interpret it pretty liberally. It has to be somebody who meets the standard, and the logistics have to comply, which turns out not just in COVID times, but in multiple instances has been quite difficult. We've had politicians. My favorite was President Kalam, who was just extraordinary. I remember him treating a whole room full of Nobel Prize winners as though they were little children, and they responded to his extraordinary charisma, and of course our community of students and scholars and so on. We had the entrepreneur and, I suppose, activist in a sense, technology evangelist activist Nandan Nilekani give us a fabulous lecture. We had Devki Jain, the eminent feminist economist and writer. We had a photographer. We had T.M. Krishna, the Carnatic musician. So it's just a very broad range of folks. The one area that we've not had somebody yet, I think, is in the pure sciences. And anybody has any recommendations, please do reach out and let me know. And Anand Mahindra, who is our immediate contact point and alumnus of the school, I had asked him once to allow me to bend the terms of the Mahindra Lecture and invite someone I considered a personal mentor to me until he sadly passed away, Abid Bhai, the founder, Sir Fazle Hassan Abid, the chairperson and founder of BRAC, who had a huge impact on my life. And of course, he generously agreed because Abid Bhai, in a sense, through his extraordinary stewardship of the BRAC Institute, the world's largest NGO now, had really shaped India as well and the global South. But without further ado, I'm so pleased that Madhur Jaffrey has joined us and that Abhijit Banerjee is here to carry on the conversation. And thank you all for being here.
So maybe we have the lights down. I want to just show a short video before we start. Actually, Madhurji and Abhijit, you may want to see if you can turn around a little.
In this series, I'm going to show you how to cook all kinds of Indian food. Some of it you may be familiar with, the kind of food you've had in Indian restaurants, and some of it you've probably never eaten. It's the kind of food you get in Indian homes.
Today we've got world-famous chef Madhur Jaffrey.
A mission to excite Western palates led to her being described as the original Spice Girl.
She is the authority on Indian cooking.
One of the things I'm going to make is Rogan Josh. This is a classical North Indian dish. It's lamb in a red, rich sauce. Into that goes about a teaspoon of whole mustard seeds. They're going to start popping. And then some curry leaves. Now, these are fresh leaves. They're wonderful. They're used a lot in the South and they make a lot of noise.
There was a time when Britain ruled India. But it seems that now Indian food rules Britain.
You've given us a window onto a cuisine that very few people here know. I thank you, madam.
Thank you.
Her talents go way beyond the kitchen to the big screen and the written word. It was because of your award-winning performance in the 1965 Shakespeare Wala
Yes.
that you were noticed and considered the actress who could cook.
Marlon Brando was my hero, and I wanted to be another Marlon Brando. And I thought, you know, what is there to this? But I wouldn't get work because I looked like me.
Just kissing someone. Oh. Everyone knows what they're like, these English girls, and today I've seen with my own 2 eyes.
You don't know anything. Eyes are closed all the time.
What do you think you're doing? You stole it from me. Look at you, everything you're wearing is mine.
बेटी इससे पहले हिंदुस्तान आने का मौका हुआ है?
This is absolutely my first time.
We know each other a long time.
Well, based on the examination that we just ran and the complaints you've described to me, it's my opinion that you are experiencing the early symptoms of Parkinson's. I wanted to project an attractive India that had a sense of modernity. There was a deep, deep recognition and satisfaction that they were now on television in some way. What I started has not died. That's the wonderful thing. It's been picked up by other people, and it'll have a life forever now.
So, despite Tarun's interest in everything, we're not professional videographers, but we put that together quickly to give you a sense of this extraordinary life. Let me introduce these true, remarkable people who are in front of us and let the program go on. We'll have Ms. Jaffrey speaking for a little bit and then conversation with Abhijit, and then we'll throw it open to questions and conversation with the audience. Let me introduce Abhijit Banerjee. He's an old friend. He's here partly because it's punishment for good deeds. He cooked many meals for me back when I was in graduate school, and they were among the most delicious meals I ever had. He has since gone on to become the Ford Foundation International Professor of Economics at MIT. He's the co-founder of the Abdul Latif Jameel Poverty Action Lab, author of many books, including the seminal Poor Economics and also Good Economics for Hard Times. Abhijit is a trustee of Save the Children, an advisor to the UN Secretary General on post-COVID 2015 development agenda. He's also an advisor to the government of West Bengal on issues of education and on the response to COVID-19. Of course, in 2019, Abhijit was a co-recipient of the Nobel Prize in Economics. And in addition to all of that, as I said, he's an avid cook and author of Cooking to Save Your Life. Abhijit, welcome. And Madhurji, it's hard to sum up your life, but if you'll indulge me for just 2 or 3 paragraphs, I'd like to say Madhur Jaffrey's, and I wrote this down because I couldn't trust myself, so forgive me for reading it. Madhur Jaffrey's public life could be said to have begun with her regular practice of spinning khadi, hand-spun cotton, as a child, and helping deliver it to a collection depot set up by the Indian nationalist movement. That is from her own memory of her childhood and family life in Delhi during the era of the British Raj. She turns 90 this year and has reflected in her writings on that experience of the Raj, of participating in the freedom movement, along with her memories of watching the transfer of power at India Gate, attending one of Mahatma Gandhi's last prayer sessions at Birla House, and witnessing his cremation at Rajghat. Jaffrey studied literature and philosophy in India, was a scholarship student at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, and went on to become an award-winning actress with work on the stage as well as on screen, including, as we all know and saw, indelible performances in Merchant Ivory films. And among her many enduring gifts to modern life, she and her husband introduced James Ivory and Ismail Merchant to each other. So no Madhur Jaffrey, no Merchant Ivory films. Of course, we all know her as the writer of some of the finest cookbooks ever written, starting with An Invitation to Indian Cuisine, which won the James Beard Foundation's Cookbook Hall of Fame Award. Her latest is Madhur Jaffrey's instantly Indian cookbook, Modern and Classic Recipes for the Instant Pot. We widely celebrate her and have been for bringing authentic Desi food and food culture, which is just as important, to the West through her books, her TV shows, her work in restaurants. And essentially, we're celebrating her for her original and creative engagement with contemporary culture without borders. So it's not a surprise then that she is also the winner this year of James Beard Foundation's Lifetime Achievement Award. She's the first South Asian to win this high honor. In India, she's been recognized in multiple ways, including by one of the government in one of the highest civilian awards given in India, the Padma Bhushan. And I just want to say that, we live in this era where South Asians play leading roles across life in the West: academy, arts, sciences, technology, music. So Madhur Jaffrey, whom we have before us, she's one of the pioneers who ushered in this age of very rich and fruitful modern exchanges across borders, with her extraordinary work ethic, her intelligence, her ambition, and most of all, her original engagement with both the West and her inherited cultures and traditions. Madhur Jaffrey, everyone.
Hello, everyone. How are you? I would like to begin with the particular time, place, and other circumstances of my early childhood in order to try and explain some of the compulsions that drive me to this day. So, I was born in Delhi in 1933. I was born into an upper middle class Hindu family, and the British at that time still ruled India. I came from a joint family. Now, I don't know if you are all familiar with this is an extended family where the grandfather, grandmother are head of the household, and then in the same household are many of their children, their grandchildren, everybody else lives together in the same house. So that's how I was brought up. And this was a grand house, big house on the Yamuna River. My grandfather was a barrister, and he had built this house, this large house on the river. And the house was in the center, then there were courtyards on either side, and then running like long trains on either side of the two courtyards were rooms. On one side it was a dining room, kitchen, pantry, and all that. And on the other side were guest rooms and his law office. My grandfather, as I said, was a barrister, and his law office was on one side. And of course, he used the office when he was younger, but as he got older, this office fell into disuse. It gathered dust. His cleaning man, his man, Ishri, his name was, wouldn't clean it anymore, so they just kept the door shut. But it was not locked, it was just shut. And I made it a habit of going in very often into this room because it had a lot of books. And I love to read. I love to read anything that I could find. And amongst the books in that office were books that were called books of knowledge. They were like encyclopedias, you might say, but they had different kinds of things that I could read. For example, I went in and read all about the Greek gods, every Greek god and what the Greek gods did and which god was related to whom and what travels they did, etc., etc. Now, next to the book of knowledge was a red leather-bound book. I had not noticed it before, so one day I picked it up and started reading. And I discovered that it was the history of the family, starting in mythological times and then going right up to the end of, almost the end of the British period, not quite the end. And I thought it was very interesting. So it starts with Brahma, the god Brahma, deciding that our clan, our particular clan that I came from, was going to have two castes. We were not just one caste, we were warriors, and we were scribes. We were going to be lawyers. There were sort of the scales of justice drawn out and given to us. We were going to be historians. We were going to be writers. So ink was going to flow through our veins, and we were going to keep records. So guess what I'm doing today? It seems to be my destiny. So anyway, so this is how it all started. Then it went on to the exploits of our family in Mughal times. I'm skipping a lot here. And in the Mughal times, my family members were ministers of the court, ministers of finance, this, that, and the other, grand things. And then on to the British times, when they worked for the British. They worked in the Mughal courts first, then they worked for the British. And one of my ancestors actually was involved in the fighting and the fight for independence at that time, but we took the British side at that time because we had worked for the British and we took their side, for which we were amply rewarded. So as I read this family history and the exploits of men, I noticed that from the beginning to the end, there was not one woman mentioned. Not one. Now, I'm a New Yorker. I have lived in New York all my life. And as we would say in New York, so what were women? Chopped liver? Nothing, no place. As I was growing up in India, it was the men who decided what the woman should be doing. In earlier times, it started with my father, and then it became my brothers, but it was always the men. And even we who had servants in the house, the servants treated us differently. All the boys, for example, were like heir apparents. They were going to be men. But what were women? Again, not exactly chopped liver, but something close to it. And they treated us, all right, but you're going to just be a mere woman. Now, it was also true in our particular household and our particular joint family that there were lots and lots of children. So we became friends with the cousins who were our age. And it just so happened that all the cousins who were my age were boys. I didn't have to pick that, it just happened that way. So I wore shorts because they wore shorts. I swam with them. I played cricket with them. I went across the river with them to get watermelons from across the river. I did everything with the boys. And yet, they would become men, and I would become a mere woman at the end of it all. So that consciousness was very much there in my mind. And as I was growing up, I remember this feeling of a great sort of intellectual roiling in my head, almost like a volcano that couldn't find a place that it could erupt or an area where it could go. There were no women that I could look up to. There were no role models. There was no one that I could say, oh, I want to be like her, I want to be like him. There were just a few that would sort of come up every now and then, and one of them, I remember, was Jane Austen. And I remember reading her and reading all her books. And I remember the opening of Pride and Prejudice. I don't know if you all remember that book. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. Jane Austen could be so deliciously, genteelly caustic. It was wonderful to read. And I just read all her books. Now, another person whom I greatly admired at that particular time was a painter. Now, you all may not be familiar with this particular painter. She was part Indian and part Hungarian. And her name was Amrita Shergill. And she did the most marvelous paintings. They were she studied in France, they were modern, and yet she managed to find the fluid lines of India and somehow put them in. And I thought she was absolutely wonderful. She painted in the 30s. So I wrote, not like Jane Austen, but I tried to write all the time. I tried to paint, and at least I had these two people that I could look up to in some way and try and be a little like them, but I was desperate for role models. Now, the other thing that was happening in my life simultaneously was I was acting. Ever since the age of 6, I was cast in school plays. I remember my first part was that of a brown mouse, so I hopped along, and did whatever brown mice did. And then later on in life, I began to act more seriously. And here's the very interesting thing. We were a British colony. And as a result of being a British colony, the British, in their wisdom, would send us, I think from their educational department, I don't know what, but they would send us either a whole Shakespearean ensemble that would perform for us. This was rare. We never got a full play, but occasionally we got a Romeo and Juliet, the full play, and we would all, father, mother, kids, everyone would go and watch it. But most of the time, there were like 1 or 2 people. Like I remember Dame Sybil Thorndike coming to the college where my grandfather and my father and my brothers had gone, which was St. Stephen's College in Delhi. And Dame Sybil Thorndike came and read little scenes and things like that. And of course, all the children were there. All of us were there all the time. We knew our Shakespeare. I remember little kids sort of saying along, to be or not to be. That is the question. Whether 'tis nobler, we know how to say 'tis. You didn't have to say it's nobler, you had to say 'tis. whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of the greatest fortune. So we knew all this. We were brought up with Shakespeare. And I remember even in our school, I went to it was called a Parda school, Queen Mary's Higher Secondary School. We had a stage, which was grass. It was outdoors, and it was grass. And we did Midsummer Night's Dream on that. I was 13 or 14, and I was playing in Midsummer Night's Dream. I was playing Titania, the fairy queen. And I remember sort of marching out there and telling Oberon, the fairy king, off, these are the forgeries of jealousy. And never since the middle summer spring met we on hill and dale, forest or mead, by paved fountain or by rushy brook, or the beached margent of the sea, to dance our riglets to the whistling wind, but with thy brawls thou hast disturbed our sport. Tell him off. Tell Oberon off. So I so remember that Shakespeare was not just a part of our lives. He was a part of our soul. We never thought of him as British. We thought of him as universal soul, Indian. That's what he was. I want to stop here and tell you a little story of something, fast forwarding a little bit to my father. Now, I had studied acting, done films, and won the Best Actress Award at the Berlin Film Festival, which you saw, the Silver Bear at the Berlin Film Festival. And we had come back to India, and we were being celebrated by the Indian government. And I remember it was a glittering kind of occasion in Delhi. Marlon Brando sat on one side of me. The great director Satyajit Ray sat on the other side of me. And there was a little break, and I saw my father go by with the Vice President Zakir Hussain of India, and he was telling him, acting is just her hobby. He never took me seriously. Even until the last days, he never took me seriously. Just a hobby. So, and don't get me wrong, my father was a wonderful man, but what he had was two perfect boys that went to very good schools, two perfect girls before me who were pretty and would find fine husbands. And then there was me. I came along, and I was sort of odd-looking and different, and my father sort of tolerated me and thought I was fun. And he treated me not like he treated his other girls. I was unnecessary. I didn't have to be born, but I was there. So he kind of just let me be. And he sort of enjoyed me. I was very different from the others. And then he did something which I thought was absolutely wonderful, which affected my life to a great deal much later on. And he was a gardener. And he was not the kind of gardener who got his fingers dirty. No, not that kind of gardener. But the kind of gardener who sat in a chair and ordered seeds from Calcutta. And then he would tell the gardener, the Mali, okay, now you build this garden here, and you plant this here, and you plant that there. But we were the beneficiaries of his garden. We would go out into the garden and eat the fresh tomatoes, take little salt and pepper in our hands, and take the tomatoes off the little bushes and dip them in the salt and eat them. We grew our own beans, we grew our own peas. We had our own cows for the milk. And in the morning, the milk was churned and made into buttermilk and into butter. And I managed to get those wonderful tastes very early on in life of what food should taste like. And my father was entirely responsible for that. And the other thing that my father did was that whenever we had, say, a wedding in the house, the food was, there was going to be so much food needed that it wasn't cooked in the house, and we got special caterers. So every kind of family had their own family caterers who cooked their kind of food. And we had our own caterers who made wonderful, wonderful food. They would come up, they would set up tents in the ground somewhere, and they would then start cooking. Excuse me, I just drink some water. So my father was in charge of all that, and he would inspect, look at the cauliflower, see if it was wormy, whether this was right and we should have it or not. He would take the chickens and check their breasts to see if they were plump. And then he would say, okay, this chicken is okay, this is not okay, take it away. So he was in charge of picking the produce. And I remember these caterers used to make an absolutely wonderful tamarind chutney, which was hot, sweet, and sour. And into it, they would slice bananas and put it in at the end. And we just loved that. And then they would make the cauliflower, which is all wonderful. But the next day, you see what they would take the cauliflower, cut off the stem, leave it for the next day. And the next day, they would cut the stem lengthwise in either halves or quarters, depending on how thick it was, and then stir fry it, cook it, till it was encrusted with these hot, sour, salty spices. And we would pick our piece like an artichoke leaf, put it in our tongues and pull. So you would get all the soft parts of the cauliflower stem and discard that awful hard part. And we just loved that. We just loved that. So this, from my father, I learned how the caterers could provide such wonderful food, and I learned the taste of these foods through my father. Now, my mother, on the other hand, was totally different. She came from not such a prominent family as my father, and she learned to cook. She had to cook. They didn't have servants in the house, so she had to cook herself, and she was a wonderful cook, and she's the one who really taught me how to cook. And I remember going to my mother's house, and they ate in those days in a very Muslim way. They would spread a sheet on the floor, and then the men would eat first, and the food would be served to them, and what was left, then the women would eat. Now, during a certain season, which came in the monsoon time, we had these wonderful, wonderful monsoon mushrooms. And they would be cooked in my mother's house, and then they would be served to the men, and the men would start eating them, and I'd be watching, because we were going to eat later. Are they going to eat all of it? Are they going to leave some of it behind for me? And then they would send for seconds, and then they would get more. I said, is there anything going to be left for us? And sometimes there was, and sometimes we just got the juice that was left, but even that was delicious. But it was something I learned from my mother, how to make, actually. And I still make those mushrooms. I can't get the particular monsoon mushrooms, but I do make it with other mushrooms, and it's a wonderful dish. Now, as I was growing up, these smells that would start coming from the kitchen when the food was ready, and I particularly remember the smell of basmati rice. Of course, it would be a huge pot of basmati rice because there were many members of the family that had to eat. So this huge pot would start steaming, and the steam would waft, and it would go over the courtyard and into the house and come to us. Basmati rice, dinner, lunch is about to be ready. And would that, if it was a simple kind of lunch, we would have some moong dal, which would be spiced up at the end with browned onions and asafoetida and a red chili that had been browned nicely, and cumin seeds. And then with it, we might have some okra that had been cooked with onions and cumin seeds. And in the end, they would take green mango powder, which was nice and sour, and sprinkle it over the top. And what a delicious, simple meal it made, and how we all loved it. So I grew up in Delhi with the best of Indian foods. And I think what happened was that years later, I was in France with some friends, and my husband, who's a violinist, was reading a book of music. He was a score. He was looking at a Bach Chaconne score, and somebody asked him, can you hear the music as you're reading it? And I thought, it's the same question. It's the food is exactly the same. Can you taste it before, as you are reading about it or cooking it? And I realized that, of course, that is the case. Because, and I didn't know this as a child, but there is such a thing as a palate. And some of us have a good ear, some of us have a good sense of smell, some of us have good eyes, but some of us have a palate. And we not only taste, but then we remember the taste. It shoots up to the files in our head, and they are retained, and they can be recalled. And that is called taste memory. And that is very important for someone who wants to cook and remember what to cook and how to cook. So, for example, I'll tell you, when I'm shopping and I go to the market and I see some beans, and the beans look very good. So in my mind, I'm saying, shall I make it with cumin seeds and slivers of fresh ginger and a little bit of lime juice at the end? Oh no, maybe I'll make a paste of mustard seeds and green chilies. And, oh yes, and maybe I'll put some kalonji. What is kalonji? Nigella in it. And maybe I'll do it that way. So, and you're tasting it. So you decide what to cook without tasting anything, but tasting in your memory. And that is very important. When you say somebody has a good hand, they cook very well, they say they have a very good hand. Well, the hand is a reflection of the memory that is in your head. And then you remember things and you cook them because you remember them. So that is something, as I said, I did not discover when I was a child. I didn't know any of this. But over the years, this is something that has come to me and that I have figured out for myself. Now, I'll move on here. As I said, I was born in British India, but the rumblings for independence had started very early. Even when I was little, I remember hearing about it. So we had already had, in 1857, India had what is the British called a mutiny, and the Indians now call their first war of independence. And our family, my ancestor, Jivan Lal, who was alive at that time, worked for the British. And as he said, we've eaten their salt, so we have to fight for the British. And he did, they did. We don't know what the women thought or what they had to say because, chop liver there. So anyway, the men decided to fight for the British, and of course the British won. Now, the family, for helping the British, were amply, amply rewarded. We were given this huge orchard by the river, by the Yamuna River, where my grandfather eventually built his house, where I was born, and where not only my grandfather, but all the descendants of Jivan Lal, many, many of them built their homes, and they are still there today. They still exist, all those homes. So we were very much rewarded for that. And now we have to move on a little bit. It's getting to be 1945. World War II is over. The British have agreed to give India their independence. Hooray, we're going to be independent. But not before splitting the country into two. And mind you, not just splitting. There's going to be Pakistan and India. But it's not just going to be Pakistan on one side of India. There's going to be two Pakistans, one on the west of India, one on the east of India, and India is going to be in the center. Good for us. Then they drew a line right through the Punjab side and the Bangladesh side, what is now Bangladesh. So the line went through houses, through fields, through villages, it didn't matter. Just a line was drawn, and this became Pakistan, this was India, and this was Pakistan. So India was a huge country then. So masses of people started moving. Hindus coming from Pakistan by foot, by train into India. Masses of people started moving from India to Pakistan, Muslims who wanted to get to Pakistan. Trains would arrive with nothing but dead bodies in them, filled with blood. There was mass killing. People, women and children were thrown into wells. People were asked to drop their pants to see if they were circumcised. And if they, depending on which side was looking, the person was killed and, thrown away. Things happened in all families that were just unspeakable. In my own family, one cousin disappeared and came back a week later, and he had lost his mind. He was obviously tortured, sodomized. We don't know what happened to him, but he was never the same again. Another friend was the head of a hospital. He was a doctor. And he called my uncle and said, there's a mob. I'm trying to tell them they shouldn't enter the hospital. My uncle rushed off. We kept saying to him, don't go, you'll get killed. He rushed off to try and help him. This doctor friend of ours, he told the mob, please, this is a hospital, don't come. They shot him dead. So everybody in the family had worse stories of people leaving the Punjab. And it was just an awful time. It was estimated that 1 million people were killed, but today they say there's closer to 3 million. So it was a terrible time for all of us. But what happened in our school? For example, our school was a school with Muslim girls and Hindu girls. And suddenly, with this talk of partition, it was like the Suez Canal had been parted. On one side were the Muslim girls, on the other side were the Hindu girls, each proclaiming the right of their side for this or that. And I was always in the middle, pleading for both sides to get along. And I have to tell you, I was hated by both sides. It was a lesson to be learned, I don't know what happened to the Muslim girls who left India during that time. Either they got to Pakistan or they didn't, and if they did, they must be as old as I am today, But I never found out. When I went to Pakistan, I tried to look for some of them, but I must say that I never found them. So then I went through high school, and it was a question of what I was going to do afterwards. And I wanted to go to the JJ School of Art in Bombay. And my sister, and you would say, why do you consult your sister? I consulted her because my mother actually knew no English at all. She spoke no English. And in those days, she had just gone through the 8th grade. And after she died, we discovered all these medals in our cupboard. She was obviously a very bright woman, but she was light-skinned and pretty, therefore pretty. You see, if you were light-skinned, you were pretty. And everybody knew she would make a good match, so why educate her at all? So she was not able to help me in my decisions. I had to turn to my older sister. And she said, don't go to the JJ School of Art, go to a proper college in Delhi and do English literature, which is what I did. And then when I graduated from college, I was acting. I was already acting in the theater. And various people had come to see me from the British consulate and various other places. And they had suggested that I study at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art and offered me scholarships. And in those days, you had to get a scholarship because India had no foreign currency to waste on ordinary people. It had no pounds, it had no dollars. So if you wanted to go and study abroad in those days, you had to find some kind of scholarship that somebody from outside gave you. So I did manage. In fact, I got several. I got 4 scholarships, and I could go skiing in Europe with the money I had. But at any rate, I decided I would go to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London to study. So my father flew with me to Bombay. We stayed at the Taj Hotel, the same hotel, if you remember, that was attacked by Pakistani terrorists. We stayed there one night, and the next morning, my father put me on a P&O steamship. And I remember waving from a top balcony to my father. I was completely ready to leave, ready for I did not know what. And that's my story.
Let me see. It was on or not. So that was infinitely charming. It won't be, at least my part of it won't be. But I'm going to indulge myself. I want to do my fanboy moment. I knew when I came to the US, I knew how to cook, but I didn't know how to cook Indian food for the very predictable reason that we had cooks at home, or a cook at home, and he cooked adequately. And the only reason I cooked is that I didn't want to eat. I had sort of been reading about food, and I was greedy, and I wanted to eat things that he didn't make. And so those were all the things that Indians didn't make at home. And so I knew how to cook spaghetti bolognese, but I didn't have no idea how to cook a dal. So when I came to the US, I made various disastrous attempts to learn, but the first, I think, step that I took that was actually smart was to buy her invitation to Indian cooking and follow it with a certain amount of diligence. And that's how I learned how to cook Indian food. So I remain, since I cook Indian food at least a couple of times a week, every week, I remain grateful to you every week.
Thank you.
And let me start by asking about your cookbooks. You have so many cookbooks, and they look different, they feel different, they have even the artwork is different, the layouts are different. Is there a project, when you go write a book, do you have a particular project? Why this book is going to be like this other book is going to be very different from that one? Is there a clear, is there a reason why these books are, they look quite different? Some are more personal, less personal.
It's not clear when I start. The editors always want to know what you're going to do, so you give them a phony something. They want to know exactly what it's going to be, so you tell them something. And of course, then you start working on the book, and it doesn't always go the way you said it would go. It goes the way it wants to go, and it finds a path of its own. And as you're working on it, the ideas for the photographs begin to come. The idea of the text and how you put the text begins to form. It happens slowly, I think, and it's a creative process that you can't predict. And whenever you ask to do it, you'd give a phony answer and say something.
Let me ask you one specific one, which I really, it was a big influence on the way we did our book. And that's the World of East Vegetarian Cooking.
Yes.
That book, it has no photographs, it has illustrations only. Is there a reason why you pick? That's what we did.
No, you see,
I love that idea.
Yeah, I wrote the book. My editor chose this absolutely marvelous. I think she was a wonderful illustrator, and I still long for somebody like her and keep wishing I would find somebody again like her, but I never have. She was a very good, imaginative illustrator. And this was not my doing. I give all the credit for that to my editor, Judith Jones, who was a wonderful food editor and did all the Machal Hazan and Julia Child books. She was a famous editor. So it was her choice, and I have to give her credit for that.
That's staying a little bit in that visual space for a minute. One thing that you hear about, there was this whole, I don't know, the Indian government in its wisdom tried to make khichdi India's national food. And there was this whole rather bewildered reaction from people in the West because it looked gloppy. It looked like what it is, which is it's a gruel. It's maybe an extraordinarily tasty gruel, but it still looks like what it is. And I think that's do you think that's a specific challenge for Indian food, that it sort of looks it doesn't look kind of structured, and French food
the British referred always, I remember reading in all these I loved reading travel books from different periods of India, and they always called khichdi a mess of beans and rice. Remember?
Yes.
Mess of beans and rice. And I've always loved khichdi in all its forms. I like it when it's gloppy. I like it when what we call kili khichdi, which is dry, and the beans and rice are all separate. I love it in all its forms. And I don't know if it's our national dish. Certainly it was a national dish. You can't make something a national dish.
It was in our nationalist project, it was a step. We decided we have to, as a great nation, we have to have a national dish.
No,
and it was khichdi.
We can't do that. We are a nation of such variation that each area has a national dish, and to make one dish the national dish is a bit pathetic, I think.
I'm not about to disagree, but I was more asking, have you thought about how would one make, I don't know, Indian food look sexy? I mean, is that sentence?
When it goes into the mouth, it's sexy.
Surely. But people eat with their eyes as well. People do eat with their eyes. I mean, I have young children, and I see exactly that. They look at the food with great suspicion.
Some things that look sexier than others, like a hunk of meat, perhaps look sexier. You can have different kinds of grilled chicken that look pretty good.
Yeah. No, I mean, you don't have to entertain this question. I do think that it's something that maybe I thought you might have thought about it, of how to.
No. Okay. I've never been bothered.
It's fine.
I just wanted to taste divine. That's what I'm looking for.
So, when you on that taste, and I think related to what you were saying about the memory of taste, how do you land on a recipe? I mean, at what point do you decide? Where do you start? Do you start from you construct it yourself? Do you take some other recipe? Do you change it? How does the process?
It depends. If I'm doing a book, say on the food of Andhra, which I have done, so I traveled through what was then Andhra, as Andhra's sort of changed a little bit. So I traveled from one end of the state to the other end of the state. I decided I would not fly, I would go by car. So I could stop, jump out of the car and have, whatever I wanted to eat, dosa, whatever it was along the way. And you learn so much as you travel and stop at each stop and stop at where everyone is stopping to eat. And I started taking recipes down that way. And then I always then like to go into homes and get recipes. But people are wily. For example, in Hyderabad, they won't tell you everything. So then one person holds back one ingredient and another person holds back another ingredient. So if you go to 10 people, each person holds back different things. So you can put it all together and decide what is missing in which place. So sometimes you just have to do a little detective work to get the recipe straight. And the other thing is I don't accept recipes from people, like written recipes, because they never know. They say yellow dal. What yellow dal? What do you mean by that? And they name a dal in a local name that I don't understand. But if I see it, they can write what they want. But it's when I see it and when I'm watching them cook, I see how low the heat is, how high the heat is, whether they're stirring gently, whether they're covering it. All these are details that people leave out when they're writing a recipe, and that's what makes the recipe a good recipe. And I think that's why my books sell, because I am like an idiot. I started with no knowledge of food, and I learned. And because I learned, I knew nothing and started from scratch. I write in the same way as if you know nothing, and you're going to learn and get it absolutely right. You're going to make it like me or better than me, because I'm going to tell you how high the heat should be, how you should stir it, 3 minutes to 5 minutes. I'm going to tell you cover it and put it on a low flame. I'm going to tell you all these details so you don't get it wrong.
And but in the process of getting there, you tweak what people tell you? Do you try it out? Do you think?
No, I never, if they send me a recipe, I know it's not going to work. Because people just don't know how to write recipes. It's not their job. They are not recipe writers. They write sort of generally, and they leave out details. But if you watch them, then every detail is revealed.
But then you keep it as there. You don't change it afterwards.
No, and I give them credit. I'll say this recipe belongs to so-and-so Veeraswamy from this place or that place. I write. I never take credit and say it's my recipe, I thought of it. It's their recipe.
If you went to Andhra Pradesh to do a book, if you had to pick, and I know in Taste of India you cover many of the regions, for example. If you had to pick one cuisine in India to cook or to write about, which one would you pick?
Oh, I couldn't do that.
You wouldn't?
I couldn't. No.
But you have. You picked. You wrote a book on Andhra, so.
No, but it was not a book. It was part of. I wrote about several places. There's so many. I mean, the Pesarattu in Andhra is so delicious, and it's like a dosa, and it's made with green moong dal. And you soak it and grind it and make it into a batter, and then you make this like a dosa with it. And it's absolutely delicious. So this is a specialty of a region of Andhra. So every part of India has these specialties, and how can you say that one is better than the other? Because they're all different and they're all incredible.
I'm appropriately chastened. Let me ask you a kind of a more nerdy question.
Okay.
You've written a book called The Ultimate Curry Bible. Another one.
That is a title in England, yeah.
Yes. Madhur Jaffrey's Curry something else. I remember it's another. That's the Curry Nation or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess there is this whole conversation about what is curry, but that's a kind of it's a good example of this general intellectual concern about cultural appropriation. What right do the British have to take something? And what do you think about that? That whole conversation.
Okay, I've gone through phases. Yeah. The first phase was don't ever use the word curry. There's no such thing as curry, and that's how I started. And then I got weaker and weaker. And I finally said, to hell with it, call it what you want, It's just that you give up, because that's what they're going to call it, whatever you say.
So what's wrong with it? I mean, I don't.
No, it's okay.
Why not let them? I haven't quite understood the battle lines.
Yeah. I've given up. Let them eat cake. Let them do what they want.
And I mean, curry has its. I've had curry in England, in France, in Germany, in Austria. It has each of which has its own unique awfulnesses.
Awful. I'm glad. I was wondering, unique what?
Yeah. But do you feel that we should somehow feel offended, or just feel happy that they have?
No, I've gone numb to that.
Okay. I'll ponder that. I'm going to ask you one more of these kind of nerdy questions, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor to ask better questions. Do you, well, maybe two questions. One is you have many books with the word vegetarian in the title. You're not a vegetarian.
I'm not, but here's the thing.
Yeah.
We sat at this long dining table in our joint family when we lived in that house, which was one long table, and then two more tables that were added on as children came. My grandfather sat at that end, way away from me, and next to him was his my grandmother. My grandmother was a vegetarian. I never knew it because I never saw her cook. So far away. So a lot of the dishes were developed by her. This famous cauliflower with cheese was apparently my grandmother's recipe. So there were vegetarians within the family that I knew not of. And I soon discovered their cuisine and later wrote about it. But we are a family where the women did not eat meat like the men did. The men were all Mughlai, of the Mughal tradition, sher, shairi, all that. Hunting and poetry and Urdu, Persian poetry and all that. The women, on the other hand, read the Bhagavad Gita. They were vegetarians. They were sort of a different league. But they all coexisted in some way.
So that's actually a good word, coexisted, because I feel like right now vegetarianism, especially in India, but many places in the world, has become much more, it's become weaponized in different ways. Again, what's your thought on that? Exactly because of your background.
I don't know if I would use the word weaponized.
In India, I would say yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes, yes.
Oh.
But but it's become ideological, at least.
Oh.
I would say maybe more than that.
Yeah. I mean, I openly eat everything, and I try and eat more dal and just what's healthier. In those terms, I try and eat what is the healthiest food possible, but I'm not a stickler for. I mustn't eat this, I won't eat that. I'm not at all.
I'll ask one last question, and then when you write books, do you think of how they will be used? Do you think of who your audience is, who is reading it?
No, I'm just glad to finish them.
Okay. On that, I'm going to open the floor. Thank you.
We have mics in the room, so if you have a question, just raise your hand, and Abhijit, you can point out people. If you want, you can start with them and bring it over to them.
Is it on?
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. Oh, my name is Vibha Pingle. I try to cook Indian food. I'm terrible at it, so I don't. And that's my question that's going to follow. I love your idea of muscle memory for taste and palate, and how you have memories of what the food ought to taste like, and it helps you as you replicate it, as you try to cook it. And as I just mentioned, I never try to cook Indian food because I feel I can never replicate the memory I have of Indian food, eating that at my grandmother's house, or that my mother used to cook. She didn't like cooking, but she cooked occasionally. But my point is, so if I cook other kinds of food, I love Mediterranean food. If I cook Moroccan food or Lebanese food, am I just making a version of Indian food? So is it my muscle memory I think I'm using Mediterranean ingredients, but I'm really giving it very subconsciously an Indian twist to it?
I don't know what you're doing, actually. Maybe Maybe you are giving it an Indian twist. I haven't had your food, but there are wonderful cookbooks that are of Moroccan food. Paula Wolfert wrote some wonderful books on Mediterranean food, particularly Moroccan food. And so I think you have to trust yourself to a good Moroccan cookbook, if that's what you like to do, or whatever. There are good cookbooks around. And if you follow those, I think you will get the authentic thing. But if you're putting turmeric and coriander and thing, then you are doing something else.
Here, and then I'll come over.
Thank you. I'm Yakub Bangesh, and thank you for a wonderful talk about your growing up. And my question is actually related to that. When you think of Indian cooking, since you of course spoke about your childhood and everything, and that India pre-47 is very different than India now. It's 3 different countries at least. How do you imagine just the word Indian? Where does it begin? Where does it end? Or does it not end? And the reason I asked this question is I was having a conversation with someone a few months ago, and I mentioned some Anglo-Indian cooking. And this person said, oh, no, that's not Indian cooking. That's, something weird. And I was like, well, it's Anglo-Indian, so it must be Indian. So how do you imagine when you look at the word Indian and, when you kind of, draw the parameters of your books? Because I also noticed that, as far as I know, that only in one book of yours, the title says, Pakistan, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. Do you imagine it that way? And how has that changed, perhaps? But how do you think of the word Indian?
When I was growing up, there was only one India. There wasn't Pakistan, and there wasn't Bangladesh. So to me, that there is an India of old, which encompasses all these things, if that's what you're asking. And I think of that. Sometimes I think of India and Pakistan. I've been to Pakistan, and I love their food. And so I've written about Pakistani food as well. So I'm not 100% sure I know the exact question you're asking. But certainly for me, when I think of India, pre-partition India is part of the world I'm in.
I guess there are several people on this side. Okay. Why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Hi, here. Yes. Hi, I'm Nishant. Can you end this debate for once and for all if there is something called veg biryani?
What biryani?
Veg biryani.
We often get involved in the debate that vegetable biryani is nothing but pulao.
Pulao. Now, pulao to me is one thing. Pulao to me is made with meat that has been cooked, and you take the broth from the meat, and you cook the rice in the broth with the meat and onions, and that is a pulao. But I suppose you can make a vegetable pulao, but I would call that rice and vegetables or something like that. Or you could, if you want, call it a pulao. But if you've taken the most important thing in a pulao is the broth. It's the meat broth that you cook the rice in. And if there's no broth, then it is not a pulao. You might try calling it a biryani, I don't know. But it is rice and various things put together, and I think it's all right to call it a biryani, but I wouldn't call it a pulao.
Yeah, please.
So I think that in the diaspora, Indian cuisine has really been defined in terms of, generally people think of North Indian food and dominant caste food. So do you think that this is a problem at all? Do you think that this is something that needs to be changed? And especially at a time when India is really politicizing the consumption of beef, do you think there needs to be a challenge in terms of the hegemony of what is considered proper Indian food?
You mean, is the question, should the food of other states of India be equally thought of as Indian food? That's the question.
Other states, but also, historically, for example, oppressed caste groups, Dalits, and, people in Kerala, people in the Northeast have eaten like beef, and that's been being really politicized like now. So do you think that should also kind of be raised up as also being Indian food, especially in the diaspora?
What is the question?
Can beef eaters be Indians is the question, I think.
Can beef eaters be Indian?
Not really. No.
Okay, let's decide what the question is. Who has a view of what the question is?
I'll try. I think there is first is in your opinion, is what is usually described as Indian food upper caste Indian food? Whether that's true or not, that's one question to you. The second question is...
No, it's all our food. It's the food of everyone. And there are different kinds of Indian food. And we all have our foods. The Dalits may have, if they have different foods, that's Indian food too. Everything is Indian food. If it's cooked by Indians of one group or another group, it is Indian food. Beef. The question of beef to me, of course beef is Indian food. It's not only cooked by Muslims, it's cooked by many other people as well. It's eaten by other people as well. Christians eat beef, and Anglo-Indians eat beef. Anglo-Indians are Indians. And so I think it's legitimate that beef would be considered, beef dishes would be, if they're Indian, would be considered as Indian as goat dishes. Don't you think so? Yeah. There's a half hand here. Did you have a half hand?
I think she had. She's next.
Hi, my name's Sana. Thank you so much for this beautiful talk. You're such a wonderful storyteller and also so funny. So I was wondering, what's like one of your funniest food memories?
My funniest what?
Food memories or cooking memories.
A food memory or a cooking memory that's funny.
Nothing comes to mind the second, but...
It's all right. We can move to the next question.
Yeah, if I think of something, I'll come back to you.
Thank you so much for, like you said, this was very informative in the sense about your life, and just generally it was very, it was nice hearing about it. My question is, I think my biggest barrier in cooking as someone who's recently come out of undergrad and has met with the beast of cooking for myself is every time I ask my mom or my grandmother how I should make a particular thing, they'll be like, oh, andaze se dal do. And I just can't. I tell them, like, if I had the andaz, I would not be asking you.
Of course.
To buy her book. That's the first.
No, I think he's absolutely right. And I don't say buy my book. I say buy a good book that will tell you, give you the measurements of the spices. And if it's not the dish you want to make, you may come from a particular community that specializes in a dish that is not in my book or somebody else's book. Then you have to sit your mother or grandmother down and have them make it in front of you, and you write down what they're doing. Write it down. See, if they're putting a little dhania in, you say, before you put it in, I'm going to measure it. Let me measure it. And you measure it. That's what I do. Just measure it. And then you write it down, and the responsibility then is yours. Okay?
True. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shreya. I had a question around if you have thoughts about how Indian cuisine at West is not very diverse and it does not represent a lot of states in India. And why is it so? Like, is it because of the migration practices or any other factors? Especially in the restaurants that the food is served.
Okay, somebody has to repeat that.
Yeah, the restaurants here, typically, I think she's saying, have Punjabi food or maybe occasionally...
Have you been to Sema, Dhamaka? Have you been to any of these?
But that's a very small and new trend that's indeed happening. But if in Boston, you can go to most Indian restaurants. I recommend against it. But if you do, then you get either Punjabi food or occasionally some version of South
I'll
Indian.
tell you what happened. Punjabis are very outgoing. And they are the first ones who went out and opened restaurants. There are two groups of people that went out and opened restaurants in the world. One was the South Indian dosa guy. They went and opened restaurants. And then the other was the Punjabis. And they did North Indian food, and the dosa guys did their dosas. So there were two kinds of foods that were originally in restaurants in the Western world. So if you don't like the Punjabi food, you can also go to the dosa guy.
Hi, this talk was so interesting, and I feel very kindred with you because I grew up between India and London. So I very much relate to kind of your cross-cultural experiences. I think something that I think about as somebody who's recently immigrated from India is that I feel like I'm further away from my family's food traditions and like that food heritage. And so sometimes I think about like if I were to have children, like how can I pass those traditions and that heritage down to them if I myself feel like by moving I have kind of become more distant from it.
Yeah,
so I was
yeah,
just
yeah.
wondering if you have any advice for kind of second generation South Asians.
What community are you from?
It's such a long story. My parents are, my mom's side is Punjabi, my dad's side is Bihari, but like we live in Mumbai and my grandfather's in the military, so it's really like all over.
Okay, so the two traditions then are Bihari and Punjabi. They're both good ones. They are. So at least if you follow some of the Punjabi, wonderful Punjabi, I could do with a Punjabi paratha any day. I just love them. So you learn how to make the breads. You learn how to make gobi. You learn how to make gobi achar. The Punjabi gobi shaljam achar is absolutely out of this world. So you learn the Punjabi things and you learn the Bihari dishes. There's so many good ones there. And ghugni, wonderful things that you can make that are from Bihar. So learn some of each and try and use them every day and then learn to cook them for when you have, I don't know if you have kids, whenever you have kids, you learn to cook for them and you pass it on. But learn your own traditions. It's a good idea to know what you come from.
Yeah, thank you.
Hitesh, we need to have... Okay, well... Okay, and then you.
Hello, my name is Rakesh Mathur.
Hey,
Hey.
Mathur.
Indeed. So a question I have is it even possible to write a cookbook?
Is it what?
Is it even possible to write a cookbook? And I'll tell you why I'm asking that question. Because when you write a linear recipe down, put this amount, a lot of things when I've observed my mother cooking and so on, it's just at the right time you need to put something. Or the frying pan or something needs to look at the right color, right? So there's so much stuff in between the words that are written and what a really good chef or cook might manage to do, that I just wonder if you can ever write a cookbook. I mean, you can approximate a recipe, but the exact
The question
different
is,
people
can
coming
you
in.
write a cookbook? Or
Yeah, well, how the level of detail that you'd have to put into it,
yes,
is almost impossible to.
It is not impossible.
Okay.
It is possible.
Actually, I'm asking.
You just have to
because how do you say that it's
You
when
just do it.
andaz or when it smells in a certain way or jab itna garam ho jaye. There's so many.
Likho, yay likho. Write this. That you take a frying pan, you look at the size of the frying pan you're using. It's an 8-inch, 10-inch.
Right.
Heavy. Is it heavy? Is it light?
Right.
Is it non-stick? And if you decided to use that for a reason, start cooking in it. How much oil are you putting in this pan? What is the heat? Just write it all down.
But has anybody been able to ever write such a complete?
Well, of course, that's what good.
I'm going to.
That's what all.
Let me ask another question. Yeah.
Every good cookbook is just that.
Yeah. Over there.
Thank you for sharing your story. In your opinion, should cooking be thought of as more of an art or a science?
It's neither an art, nor is it a science, though it has elements of science for sure. Because certain things, I don't know the science part of it. There are others who've specialized in the science aspect of it. How things go together and melt or don't melt or gel. People have written books on that, wonderful people with knowledge. I don't have that kind of scientific knowledge, but other people do. It's an art to a very small degree. I think it's a craft. I would call it a craft and a science.
So I think it's probably it's 7, and I think we said we'll end at 7. So I think it's time for us to give Madhur an amazingly big hand.